Welcome to this explainer. We are diving straight into one of the most absolutely stunning geopolitical transformations in human history. We're going to unpack exactly how a fractured, totally decentralized desert environment somehow gave rise to an entirely new political system, and not just any system, one that organized so rapidly and so effectively that it eventually toppled two massive entrenched global empires. Now, right off the bat, we aren't looking at historical heroes or villains today. We are strictly focusing on the cold, hard mechanics of statecraft to really understand the underlying structures of power, economics, and governance that made a massive shift like this even possible. So, think about the unwritten rules of global superpowers for a second. Historically speaking, nomadic regions, hanging out on the periphery of great empires, might, occasionally pull off a border raid. But they almost never conquer those superpowers, and they certainly don't completely dismantle them. Actually, scratch that. They don't just dismantle them, they completely replace them with a highly sophisticated administration in a matter of just 3 decades. To really wrap our heads around how this happened, we have to strip away all our modern assumptions about states and borders and look at the actual raw structural reality of Arabia before the 7th century. There is a specific term that perfectly defines the structural reality of this era: Jahiliyyah. Now, while you might hear it translated in a spiritual sense as a time of ignorance, historians actually use it to describe a period of just devastating political and social chaos. I want you to imagine a vast, extremely harsh landscape with absolutely zero central authority. No federal government, no overarching legal code, literally no state police force. It was essentially a ruined land where your survival depended entirely on the localized, immediate structures you belonged to. Now, because there was absolutely no unified state to enforce any kind of law, these sovereign tribal confederations basically acted as independent mini-states. They fiercely protected their independence, which, as you can guess, made the region incredibly volatile. If one tribe clashed with another, well, there was no higher court of appeal to settle the dispute. So this meant constant rivalries, constantly shifting alliances, and an environment where sheer military strength or sacred status were pretty much the only real currencies of power. They were entirely free from external political control, sure, but that freedom came at the very high cost of perpetual instability. Out of this incredibly volatile environment comes a really fascinating contrast in how things were run. Take the commercial hub of Mecca. The dominant institution there didn't function under a single all-powerful king. Instead, they governed through a joint council called Dar al-Nadwa. It was essentially an oligarchy, a tribal aristocracy, where the leaders of various clans held seats and jointly managed all the political and economic affairs. Now, contrast that joint council with the massive empire surrounding Arabia. Those systems were ruled by singular, absolute, hereditary emperors who held ultimate, completely unquestioned authority over millions. To actually survive and thrive in this harsh landscape, the elites in Mecca built what was basically the ultimate economic engine of the era, a total monopoly. They effectively created a system that completely bypassed the highly dangerous merchant shipping routes of the Red Sea. Instead, they built this massive overland camel network, so goods would arrive at the port of Aden from the Indian Ocean. From there, they structured a highly organized, bi-yearly caravan system. You had winter trips heading south to Yemen and summer trips heading north to Byzantine territory in Asham. By establishing strict treaties with tribes all along this route for security and rest stops, the Meccan administration locked down a total monopoly on global trade passing right through the Arabian Peninsula. 450 kilometers. To put that into perspective, that is the exact distance from Mecca to Medina. And geographically speaking, it represents a massive vulnerability. Think of it like a rival corporation suddenly opening up a massive mega headquarters right on your only major supply chain. When the very first Islamic State emerged in Medina, it wasn't just a shift in belief systems. Structurally, it was a lethal geographic threat to that vital summer trade route heading north to Syria. For the Meccan elites, who relied entirely on that monopoly for their immense wealth and regional dominance, a newly organized sovereign state just 450 kilometers to the north was an existential economic threat. It simply had to be eliminated at all costs. Zooming out to the macro level for a second, it's fascinating to see exactly how the towering superpowers handled this Arabian periphery. Neither the Roman nor the Persian imperial administrations wanted anything to do with directly occupying a harsh, resource-poor desert. So what did they do? They set up proxy kingdoms. The Sassanids used the Lakhmid kingdom to guard the northeast, while the Byzantines used the Ghassanid kingdom to buffer the northwest. These proxy states essentially acted as border police. Their entire job was keeping the chaotic, unpredictable nomadic tribes completely out of the wealthy imperial heartlands. And the sentiment of the regional tribes at the time, it reveals a state of just sheer political terror. They completely understood the rules of the game. When approached to form any new alliance that might even slightly anger the Sassanids, tribal leaders were incredibly hesitant. You might be forgiven for minor skirmishes on the Arab side of the border, but if you antagonize the Persian emperor, the retaliation from that state apparatus would be swift and absolutely merciless. The psychological grip these empires had over the entire region was absolute. But here is where the story shifts dramatically. Because those two great empires, they became entirely consumed by the devastating Byzantine-Sasanian War, which dragged on for over 25 years. They were locked in this absolute death struggle, just bleeding their treasuries and their militaries dry. And this created a colossal geopolitical blind spot. While the Romans and Persians were completely distracted, literally destroying each other in the north, an entirely new, highly organized political entity was forming completely unnoticed in the Arabian interior, a region they had historically just dismissed as totally irrelevant. Just look at the incredible convergence of global events happening in this exact, tight little window. In 622, the new state structurally organizes itself in Medina. In 624, the Roman military machine wins a massive turning-point victory against the Persians. And by 628, right as the superpowers are utterly exhausted, the new Islamic State completely secures its southern flank through the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And then, it instantly projects its power outward by sending formal, highly structured diplomatic letters directly to the Roman and Persian capitals. So how did the old empires react? With just staggering institutional arrogance. I mean, when the Persian emperor received this formal diplomatic letter inviting him to recognize this new authority, his reaction was to physically tear it up in a fit of rage. The imperial administration viewed the Arabs purely as subjects, as border dwellers and mere proxies. They completely, totally underestimated the new political reality knocking on their door. They failed to recognize that they weren't dealing with a disorganized tribal raid anymore, but with a highly centralized, ideologically unified state apparatus. And the fallout from this total systemic failure, it is mind-blowing. A literal domino effect takes place right away. An internal palace coup completely destabilizes the Persian administration, leading to the assassination of the emperor. Seeing these rapidly shifting tides, the Persian governor down in Yemen officially defects and aligns his entire territory with Medina. The ruler of Bahrain does the exact same thing. Just like that, direct imperial territories were suddenly absorbed right into the administrative structure of this rising desert power, and they did it without a single major military campaign. The new state was simply out-organizing the dying empires. Now, even as this new, highly organized state expanded and started interacting heavily with the Roman and Persian systems, it fundamentally rejected their core political models. The architects of this new administration flat out refused to adopt the hereditary systems of Rome and Persia. You know, that ancient practice of passing absolute power linearly through a royal bloodline. Instead, they built an entirely different set of governing principles based on accountability and non-hereditary succession. They were fundamentally breaking the mold of ancient imperial governance. This entire history really forces us to completely rethink how power shifts on a global scale, doesn't it? We've just seen exactly how a fractured, stateless region bypassed the grand strategies of entrenched superpowers, brilliantly leveraged a massive geopolitical blind spot, and instituted a radically new governing structure to absorb the ancient world. So I will leave you with this final thought to ponder. When a system is dismissed as a blind spot, how quickly can it reorganize to dismantle the very empires that ignored it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And remember, always keep questioning the structures around you.